passengers travelling to the interpretation station, please alight now.
Episode 5 of the interpretation station is called to order. Please take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. What a hell of an episode we've got lined up for you today. Oh, you're going to love this. Alright, first of all, enough of this nonsense, eh? Do you remember those crazy days before all this business started when coronavirus, #coronavirus, was nothing but a figment of the imagination of Goscinny and Uderzo? You may be asking me, what am I talking about? Well, you'll remember Asterix and Obelix, don't you? So this is one that my kids got 2 or 3 years ago. Astérix et la Transitalique. Okay, bought them in 2017. I turned to page 14, and Asterix and Obelix are having a race around Europe, and their main rival is none other than Mr. Coronavirus. There you go, coronavirus, 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 coronavirus. Who'd have thunk it, as we say? Who'd have thunk it? Well, there you go. Anyway, turning to more serious matters. Today we've got a great episode for you. We've got Uruguay. Statement by Uruguay at the Security Council. It's from a couple of years ago. No, about 1 year ago, maybe. At a meeting of on the theme of women, peace, and security. That's a very famous. That's a very major theme at the UN, at the Security Council, actually, women, peace, and security, and it all stems from the resolution 1325. Resolution 1325. Always remember that one. It's one that always gets referred to, and it's funny. Whenever I see the time, whenever I look at the time and I see it's 25 minutes past 1 or 25 minutes 30, I think, oh, it's always women, peace, and security time. 1325. Remember that one. That might come in handy. All right, so you should be able to see it here. Security Council, 8,514th meeting. So yeah, women and peace and security. It generally, it talks about how in conflicts around the world, the impact on women, sort of negative impacts this has. Covers some pretty grim themes, obviously, as you'd expect. Use of sexual violence as a weapon of war, rape, abduction. It's pretty grisly. So in a lot of UN peacekeeping missions, they specifically have gender focal points, people who work with women in the affected conflict zones. Now, so every year, every 6 months, as I say, at the Security Council, they have a big debate on the subject. And in addition to all the permanent members, and the elected members, you will have, it'll be a sort of a whole debate that'll go on the full day, and you'll get non-Security Council members also pitching in, making statements. Like I say, it's a big theme. So today we've got Uruguay. So this statement was given to me by Kerry. So we'll be using her statement as a sort of basis to work from. Just before we go any further, actually, the best way, as before, the best way to benefit from this is if you go to the description box underneath the video and open that up, you'll find a link there to the original recording, and you'll find a link also to the statement, to the text. So the best thing for you to do is to record yourself doing the statement, and then print off or whatever the text, and then follow the watch this video basically and see what sort of things you've got right. Is there anything that maybe I can help? Any sort of tips I can give you to sort of broaden your skills? That's the best way to do it. And then after that, you know what? I'm going to start linking to other videos that are related. So that's my plan anyway. So I'll find something else either to do with Uruguay, hopefully, or with peace and women, peace and security, and then you can apply that knowledge that you've learned doing this first video, rather than just doing it a second time immediately, because then a lot of it'll still be in your head. Right, you can apply it to a different text, but on a similar theme, and hopefully you can use some of the ideas that you've picked up in the first text and apply them in the other text. So that's the best way of doing this to get the most benefit. So, as I was saying, Uruguay, otherwise known as, they're actually called the Oriental Republic of Uruguay. Don't know how many of you know that. I caught me out the first time. That's what they got, the Eastern Republic of Uruguay. Uruguay, I've never been there, but I know it's in South America. Borders Argentina. Sits Montevideo capital, sits on the Rio Plata. Most important moment in Uruguayan history? Well, funnily enough, it's actually probably 1950. I think a lot of Uruguayans will say that it's 1950 when the Uruguayan football team played in the World Cup final against Brazil in Rio de Janeiro. And everyone expected Brazil to win. In fact, Brazil only needed to draw that match to be world champions. And they all thought it was a foregone conclusion. And lo and behold, Uruguayans went to Rio and they beat them. They beat Brazil. And that is, from what I gather, is considered to be one of the greatest moments in Uruguayan history. And before you actually dismiss that out of hand, some years ago, in the mid-20 teens, so that one of the former Uruguayan presidents, very simple guy, he was a farmer, I think, who worked his way up the presidency, drove around in a battered old Volkswagen Beetle, if I'm not mistaken. So he addressed the General Assembly, the general debate in New York, and he started his whole statement, going through the highlights in Uruguayan history, just setting the scene, as it were. And that was mentioned, Uruguay's victory at the Maracana. So these things you can be surprised when you might be surprised when these sort of things come in handy. Now, on a note more specific to the UN, Uruguay is actually a big player when it comes to peacekeeping operations, funnily enough. They supply a lot of troops to these missions around the world. They're a big, what's called at the UN, a troop contributing country, otherwise known as TCCs. You also have PCCs, police contributing countries. So they are very exercised, as it were, by these issues, and they will often speak they're pretty proud of their contribution to peacekeeping. So that's a good thing to remember when it comes to Uruguay. They're big players when it comes to as a TCC, and that is certainly in New York. That is an acronym that you can use pretty much immediately. Everyone knows what TCCs, PCCs are. Okay, so without any further ado, let's actually move to the statement itself, and we'll use the usual format. I'll play a bit of Kerry's recording, and then we'll stop here and there, and I'll pick out the most interesting parts, and yeah. So let us get underway.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I wish to thank Germany for organising this open debate. Uruguay aligns itself with the statements to be made by Canada on behalf of the Group of Friends on Women, Peace and Security, and the State of Qatar on behalf of the Group of Friends on the Responsibility to Protect.
Okay, so a couple of interesting things. That's a very, she starts off at the outset in primer lugar. That's a very sort of high register way of starting off. It's pretty good. El Uruguay se adhiere, so she says, I mean, aligns itself with these statements made. You can actually just say aligns with. I was just, to cut out the itself, I just say Uruguay aligns with statements made by so and so. I mean, there's quite a few little variations, subscribes to, supports. I do like to say aligns with. I find it the simplest. Que formularán. Note that that's the future tense. Sometimes these can throw you, well, and me in Spanish sometimes, but so it means that the representative of Canada hasn't yet made it. So just watch out for that to be made by. Okay, and then the group of friends of women. Now, this is an important concept, straight from the off here. La responsabilidad de proteger, the responsibility to protect, otherwise known as R to P. That is a acronym that is very, it's important, and it's quite a controversial concept. I can't remember how many years that the UN established this concept, maybe 9 or 10 years ago. And it basically implies that on occasions that the international community is duty bound. A situation may be so horrible, maybe so threatening to human life somewhere, that the UN, the international community, is duty bound to intervene and stop whatever it is that may or may not happen. I think this is all from a follow-on, from the failure to act, let's say, I don't know, in Rwanda, for example, and since then these ideas have come to the fore. Now it's very controversial because a lot of countries claim R to P is basically a pretext for interference in the internal affairs of other states, and that obviously is a big no-no, because they worry that the international community, it's a concept where it's far from clear cut, and there's as I said, it's a pretty divisive issue, pretty divisive. Okay, with that in mind, let's carry on now.
President, the briefers today have painted a tragic and devastating picture. Sexual violence continues to prevail in conflicts.
Okay, some nice stuff here. The panelists, the briefers, mostrado un panorama trágico y devastador. So Carrie says this very nicely. She painted a tragic, devastating picture. This is a sort of expression that's often used, panorama. I was thinking they've given a tragic, devastating depiction, maybe for something different to say. It's a harrowing picture, just for more adjectives. Another good word there. And this is good what she says here. La violencia sexual sigue imperando en los contextos de conflicto. Sigue imperando, continues to be rife. That's. I think when I did this, I did this in preparation for. I think I said it continues to prevail. That doesn't quite sound right in English. And what she said there, it's better. It's rife in contexts of conflict.
Perpetrated by non-state armed groups and government forces, often used systematically as a tactic of war and terrorism.
Okay, this is again, depending on how new you are to working in these kinds of meetings. I don't know, maybe if you're just coming out of university, you might not have come across it, but grupos armados non estatales, very important concept nowadays. Non-state armed groups. This is because obviously it's not the old days anymore. Nowadays you have lots of parties to conflicts who don't belong, who aren't states themselves. In the old days it was much easier. It used to be just states. So now you have non-state armed groups. Organizations like ISIS, Al Qaeda being the main ones, and you get all these sort of insurgent groups wherever they may be. The Ukrainians will refer to the the groups operating in Luhansk and Donetsk. They'll say they're non-state armed groups. So yeah, it's a very important concept to be aware of.
Sadly, in spite of efforts, it has not been possible to eradicate this crime, which violates the most fundamental principles of human dignity. This is why we need effective action to combat it.
Okay, this little phrase here, encarar acciones. I can just highlight it there. This is one not to get to trip up over, because if you do it literally, this is why we must implement actions. It's just the way the Spanish say it. So I think that Kerry talked about, we must act effectively to combat this phenomenon. So yeah, it's just, you can really encarar acciones. You can just compress it into one word. We must act. Yeah, act is the best solution there.
The resolution submitted by Germany covers a wide range of measures which would help us make progress in fighting sexual violence.
Okay, just one word here. Spectrum of measures. That's very good for abanico. You could maybe talk a whole plethora of disposiciones. So she says there's measures, and often disposiciones, when referring to a resolution, it often tends to refer to the provisions of the resolution. So I think you can actually approach this idea, you can approach it from either way. The idea that it includes a whole series of measures, or that the resolution include, or specifically talk about the provisions within the resolution. So I'd say probably more often than not, I would go to provision for disposiciones. In French is really disposition. I would probably talk about provisions, because it's a bit safer. Because if she is actually talking, if the speaker is actually referring to paragraphs within the text, then those are specifically, it's the text's provisions. In this context, of measures is fine, because it talks about what actual measures that they're going to do, they're going to implement. But so measures or provisions, but leaning more towards provisions, I would say, if you want to play safe.
And would give new impetus to the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which led Uruguay to offer its co-sponsorship. President, first and foremost, the most effective way to combat sexual violence and conflict is prevention.
Okay. Just a couple of ideas that you, again, depending on what level you are, whether you're coming, straight out of uni, whether you're still studying, or if you've been working in these meetings for longer, this idea of copatrocinio, motivó al Uruguay a brindar su copatrocinio. So she said motivated Uruguay to provide its co-sponsorship. So, so first, co-patrocinio is like the UN, you have all these resolutions, and they're always presented by a sponsor. All those resolutions have a sponsor, and if it's a particularly popular resolution among lots of different countries, they will come in as co-sponsors. So that's what's happened here. This is always one of these resolutions. It tends to be passed always whenever there's a new resolution on women, peace and security. Generally, it tends to sort of be passed without too many problems, and so many countries are keen to sort of get on board and be the co-sponsors. So that's that. And then I was just going to say motivó, just some synonyms there. Motivated, so spurred Uruguay to be a co-sponsor, prompted Uruguay to become a co-sponsor. One of those.
The common denominator of sexual violence is that it finds fertile ground where there are existing patterns of inequality and discrimination.
Okay, just one useful expression here, terreno fértil. Encuentra un terreno fértil, fertile ground. That's a useful expression. I suppose you could say it's a breeding sexual violence. A common denominator of sexual violence is where it finds fertile ground, a breeding ground. Okay, where pre-existing patterns, patrones, patterns of inequality and discrimination.
This is why states must take measures that promote respect for rights, including access to education, work, and decision-making processes for women.
Okay, just a useful word here, one that she skips here, but it's a good word. Fomenten. Fomenten el acceso a la educación. So it's to foster is the word that I like to go for. I'll tell you why I like to go for foster. I find it easy to remember. Fomenten starts with F-O, and my brain, there's some synapse in my brain or whatever it is, makes that little connection to the English word foster. I mean, you can also say promotes access, but that's what I like to use. I like to use foster education.
Uruguay believes that this is an ongoing task, including for countries living in peace.
Again, people who've been working longer, perhaps, yeah. Un labor permanente. I suppose you could say permanent, but as Kerry uses, she uses a good word, ongoing. An ongoing task of strengthening, an ongoing labor, or whatever, of strengthening.
This is why Uruguay recently approved legislation on trafficking in persons, sexual violence, and other human rights violations, including on care and reparation for victims.
Okay. Trata de personas, that's a very important concept, all right? La trata is trafficking, generally human trafficking. I know there's other expression. You've got we often talk about people smuggling in the news, maybe, but certainly at the UN, in these official meetings, the concept tends to be referred to as human trafficking. But it's also good to have a couple of those synonyms for trafficking, just so that you're not always saying trafficking. You can talk, drugs. It tends to be like drug smuggling. Drug traffickers, drug smuggling. And also, if I'm feeling really on top form and they talk about weapons, it's okay, weapons smuggling, gun running, that's a sort of slightly old expression, but I sometimes quite like to use it to show off, as I say, if I'm on form at the time. And then just moving down to this word here, reparación a las víctimas, so Kerry goes with reparation, which is fine. Again, just to give yourself some synonyms, one way I like to think of with reparación, the 3 R's. Okay, so reparación is the reparation, I guess, is the most obvious, but also remedy and redress. So if you can just use some of those, that'll really expand. It just makes you sound a lot more proficient. So just give whenever you can expand your vocabulary, it's always good to do that. That's an easy way of remembering those other two because of the R's: reparation, remedy, and redress, which all pretty much come to the same thing. Or even there's a straightforward one that's compensation as well. You can use that too.
All of these topics will be included in the next National Plan of Action on Women, Peace and Security, which will set out goals for the future.
Okay. So we're down here. De cara al futuro. So she uses the expression will set out goals for the future, which is fine. Now, if you watched the previous episode, I think it was the previous one, Belarus, if you speak Russian, if you don't. This is a bureaucratic phrase that I just love saying. I completely. It's something that I would never say just in regular conversation, but which is a big favourite, certainly amongst the English-speaking delegations and generally by bureaucrats, managers, etc. Going forward, going forward. I love going forward, so that which will establish, moreover, new objectives. Going forward. That's my favourite, and I use it all the time. So.
Furthermore, in the year 2020, Uruguay will submit its 10th periodic report to the CEDAW committee.
Okay, just a bit of general knowledge here again. Comité para la Eliminación de la Discriminación contra la Mujer. As Kerry rightly says, the CEDAW committee, so the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination against women. It's one of the famous treaty bodies that countries sign up to, and they come to Geneva to report to the various committee members. And obviously, this is one of those conventions. It's the convention actually on the elimination. There's the convention that they signed up to, and it's always very much invoked, when they're speaking about women, peace, and security. So yeah, and everyone pretty much knows what CEDAW.
President, when prevention fails, it is essential that states have effective mechanisms which allow them to provide care to victims. In particular, they need medical assistance, which includes...
Okay, so a couple of verbs here that of quite similar implications. Sedoten here, and procurarse. Now, the idea here is, that they're acquiring, they're obtaining them. There's an element of, not that they already have them, but they're trying to get them, which you need to maybe get across. So, for example, I would say it's essential for states to, well, you could say, establish effective mechanisms. The idea is they don't have them initially and they need to bring them about. Or, in particular, here, they need to obtain medical assistance. So just those two words, dotarse, procurarse, is just that idea of getting something you don't already have. Recuperación, and just here, recuperación de las víctimas, the recovery. Mecanismos efectivos que permitan atender la recuperación de las víctimas. You might maybe talk about effective mechanisms to enable, to help the victims recover, to provide recovery to the victims, something like that. Recuperación tends to be recovery, anyway.
Comprehensive sexual and reproductive healthcare services, including access to emergency contraception, safe abortion, and prevention and treatment of HIV.
Okay, a couple of interesting things here. Sexual and reproductive health care, salud sexual e reproductiva, sometimes referred to as SRA, SRHA, but that's something that often comes up with women's issues. And here, anticoncepción. So this is in Spanish. This is how they say contraception. So yeah, don't let that confuse you. And then here, interrupción segura del embarazo. So Kerry talks about safe abortions, which is very good. If you want to sound slightly more medical, you can talk about termination of pregnancy. I think when I did it myself, this text, I always do the text, by the way, myself before doing it, just out of professional, just to be professional, so I know what problems you face when you're doing it. I think I may have said early interruption of pregnancy, but a better way is early termination.
as well as psychological care, which allows victims to overcome trauma. There need to be more programs for their effective reintegration into society. All of these measures must have a survivor focus.
This is watching. This is good. You know, un enfoque centrado en el superviviente. So I think I managed to get a survivor-based approach. Enfoque. That's an interesting word. Yeah. So So she uses focus, which is okay. I think your go-to word is possibly approach, though. I think I prefer approach for enfoque.
Meeting the specific needs of various groups is also essential, such as women and girls, men and boys who have been victims of sexual violence, children born of war, refugees, and stigmatized and marginalized communities, such as LGBTI persons, who are an especially vulnerable group to this type of violence. Accountability is another priority.
Okay, so this is all very good. This is the sort of themes that the Women, Peace and Security agenda covers, issues mujeres y las niñas, women and girls. What other ideas do we have here? Children born of war, niños nacidos de la guerra. LGBT, so this one, personas lesbianas, gays, bisexuales, transgénero or intersexuales. LGBTI people. That's the quickest way of doing it. You can pretty much use the acronym there straight away. Who are very vulnerable to this type of violence. Rendición de cuentas, very important word here, very important phrase. Accountability. There's not really much latitude on that expression. Accountability is the word you want for rendición de cuentas. Okay, so let's go on. I got cut off when I just finished that last bit. I had to go to work, do the day job, so back now. So where do we get to? Back to Kerry. So we're here. Los gobiernos deben extremar esfuerzos.
Governments must step up efforts to strengthen their justice systems and ensure prosecution of perpetrators.
Okay, a couple of useful little bits there that she does nicely. Step up efforts for extremar, or maximize efforts. And then down here, enjuiciamiento. One of these is an important sort of word when it comes to sort of legal vocabulary. So to prosecute. But that, if you haven't been doing much of these sort of haven't done much in the way of legal text, enjuiciamiento dos culpables. Prosecute the perpetrators. That's an important sort of phrase. You can say to go after the perpetrators, to pursue the perpetrators, but prosecute the perpetrators is best there.
Both nationally and internationally, and must promote reporting of these crimes.
And another useful word here, denuncia de estos crímenes. When you go and something bad happens to you, you want to report it. That's the word you need, denunciar. So that's a very important word. So if you didn't know those three before, enjuiciamiento, culpables, and denuncia, I would make a note of them.
President, there are few weapons with the destructive and devastating effects for the social fabric as sexual violence. This is why tackling it must be a joint fight.
Okay. Existen muy pocas armas con la capacidad destructiva. I think she says for capacidad destructiva, the destructive capacity. But actually, when you talk about weapons, you often talk about capabilities. Perhaps it might sound a little bit nicer in English. There are a few weapons with quite the destructive capabilities. But in this context, capacity is fine. But I'm just saying, if you want to just raise things up a little notch, capabilities. El entramado social, that's the social fabric, as she rightly says. And then this last part, combatirla debe ser una tarea mancomunada. yeah, combating it, tackling it, confronting it, whatever, needs to be a tarea mancomunada, like a joint effort, shall we say? You have to work together, joint undertaking, joint venture.
States have the primary responsibility to avoid it, but the severity of these crimes, their complex causes, and their serious and persistent consequences require the assistance of the international community.
Okay. An interesting little bit thing here. Okay, so in Spanish it's los estados son los responsables primarios de evitarla. Now, in English it sounds a bit strange to say states are the primary responsible ones. I mean, you have to just change it a little bit. You have to say something like states bear primary responsibility. And that's also an interesting expression, primary responsibility, because in the UN Charter, one of the a very important concept is that the idea that states bear primary responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security. So that is that's a notion that you're going to come across a lot when doing, for example, UN text. Primary responsibility.
Uruguay values the fundamental role played by CSOs, who help victims, and we emphatically condemn any threats and attacks against them.
Okay, here's an interesting acronym that Kerry uses here, and she uses it very correctly. Las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, she talks about. That's interesting because she's quite right, civil society organizations, CSOs. Now, I've got a little bit of advice for you here. Not everyone is necessarily going to understand that, first off, someone neutral listening. It's not an acronym that immediately springs to mind for some people. If you're about to do an exam, if you're studying for an exam, and you get this in the exam, I would use it to show off your knowledge. Civil society organizations, I know they're CSOs. Look how much I know. So in an exam scenario, I would definitely use it. In reality, you might throw some of your colleagues if you use it just immediately. I would maybe say the first time civil society organizations, CSOs. So yeah, just a small nuance there, depending on, as I say, whether you're in an exam scenario or whether you're actually interpreting. Okay, let's go on.
My country also wishes to express its support for the work of the Special Rapporteur on Sexual Violence in Conflict and her dedicated team. For its part, the Security Council.
Okay, this is a very common UN concept, representante especial del secretario general, the special representative of the Secretary General, otherwise known as the SRSG. So this is another one of those acronyms that you could really, as I say, throw it in an exam. SRSG sounds very impressive. In reality, yeah, you could. I think they would know. Most people would know what the SRSG is. So he's a very important one. Sexual Rapporteur, SRSG on sexual violence and conflict.
Has a fundamental role to play. It must use all of the tools at its disposal to eradicate sexual violence and conflict.
Handy couple of phrases here. Hacer uso. So Kerry says, make use of. So an expression I like is to draw on. You draw on various tools at your disposal. You draw on capacities, whatever, at your disposal. And that's what she says. A su alcance, at its disposal, to eradicate sexual violence and conflict. So yeah, hacer uso, draw on.
It should be ensured that this topic is considered in the Sanctions Committee and that there is systematic inclusion of perpetrators' names on the lists.
Okay, a couple of interesting comments, ideas raised here. So the sanctions committees, I may have mentioned these before in previous videos. The sanctions committees were set up with the Security Council. They're basic, and they administer lists of sanctioned people. So there's various kinds. There's an Al-Qaeda sanctions list, an Al-Shabaab sanctions list. Is there an an Islamic State sanctions list? Probably. So it contains all the really bad guys on those lists, and they talk about listing and delisting. Those are the two. Yeah. If they're taken off the list, then it's what they talk about delisting. And then, okay, I'll just let her finish this paragraph.
These cases must be referred to the ICC.
Yes, derivar, referral of cases. Again, that's an important concept again when you're talking about anything to do on a judicial level. Decision whether to refer to another court, another instance, whatever.
And prevention of these crimes should be included in peacekeeping mandates. Uruguay believes it is imperative.
Okay, yeah, the prevention of these crimes should be included in the mandates of peacekeeping missions. That's right.
To collaborate as much as possible for proper functioning of peacekeeping operations with.
Okay, so Kerry, you said collaborate. She's sort of taken a bit of the calc here. It's a bit of a dodgy word, collaborate, I always find. It always evokes memories of collaboration with the Nazis in World War II. I think it's a bit of a sore spot for the French, for example. Collaborate. So I very rarely say collaborate. I would just stick to cooperate generally.
Pre-deployment training for troops in human rights law and IHL, with an emphasis on child protection and sexual and gender-based violence.
Okay. A couple of other interesting things here. So, entrenamiento de sus tropas antes del despliegue. So, pre-deployment training, that's very good. So, all these troops, when they go out on the peacekeeping missions, they're trained beforehand. One of the very important aspects that they're trained in is human rights law and international humanitarian law. So, the concepts are part, but they're often quoted together as a package, but they are separate concepts. And the idea, and international human rights law, this one, that can certainly be turned into IHL. That can certainly be reduced to the acronym. And then another one of these acronyms. I mean, I talk a lot about acronyms, okay? And I do it because it's such an obvious way, it's such a acceptable way of giving yourself a breather, of giving yourself a moment just to get your breath back. I make nuances, I say sometimes when you can maybe go in with it immediately, or which ones you can just use straight away. I mean, often it's a judgment call. I think in an ideal world, perhaps you want to say the full name first and then go into the acronym. But if you're really struggling with a text, the guy's going so fast, ultimately, if you can give yourself a breather, if it's going to help you, just go with that the acronym. So this is another one. In la violencia sexual y de género. So sexual violence and gender-based violence. Gender-based violence, GBV. So another. You can, and that's again, you could get away with it, yeah. GBV, gender-based violence.
At the United Nations, Uruguay believes it would be beneficial to have closer cooperation between its various agencies, bodies, and mechanisms within their various mandates.
Okay, a couple of things here. Now, there's just something I want to dwell on for a couple of minutes here. An interesting element in this paragraph, starting, el Uruguay entiende que resultará beneficiosa. Let's look at these constructions that begin, Uruguay believes that it will be beneficial, that begin with like the verb entiende, and then saying that it will be useful or good or whatever. So if you want to mirror that, you would say, Uruguay believes that it will be beneficial, and you've got to actually add to have whatever more concerted action among the various organs. Now that can sometimes be a bit of a mouthful because you've got to add in these words and things. I think that about 95% of cases, if you're falling behind the speaker, you can cut that down to as follows. So now they're looking here at something in the future. So these considering the benefit or otherwise of a future action. In English, you could just say Uruguay encourages more concerted action. All that entiende que resultará beneficiosa. That can all just be cut down to encourages. Now, what if it's a bad action? What if, let's just say that Uruguay didn't think it would be beneficial? You could say Uruguay cautions against more concerted action, let's say. So you're suddenly going from Uruguay believes that it would be beneficial to have like 12, 13 syllables, and you're just distilling that down to encourages 4 syllables or cautions against. So that's for something coming in the future. Now, what if it's in the past? What if Uruguay's reflecting on some past action that's been taken? For example, Uruguay believes that it was useful to have this dialogue. You could just say, rather than all that, Uruguay welcomes this dialogue. Uruguay commends this dialogue. Finished, and then you just go on. What if they didn't like the dialogue? Then again, you would say, for example, Uruguay was opposed to this dialogue. Uruguay was skeptical of this dialogue. One of those, but I think that's a technique that could really save you a lot of time. And again, certainly if you're in an exam, it would show your mind's really working on ways to cut down the amount of words, but retaining 100% of the meeting. And you get this in other languages as well. I know in Russian, for example, they have similar structures to this. The understands that it will be good, understands that it will be bad. It's a bit of a mouthful. You can just cut it down with encourages, cautions against, just depending on whether it's a good. Basically, it comes down to whether it's a good thing, whether they like it, or a bad thing. All right. Okay, so with that, let us go on.
To strengthen investigations and to make accountability viable. In conclusion, President.
Okay, again, we have this expression here, this important expression. Rendición de cuentas, which, as we say, accountability. Hacer fiable la rendición de cuentas. Okay, so Kerry says make accountability viable. Strengthen investigation actions, and I think here you could just say ensure accountability. I mean, make accountability viable, feasible is fine. And then a useful word here, conmovedores. So we want something like I think we She used poignant. In fact, we haven't come to that yet, have we? Okay.
The poignant statements by Ms. Nadia Murad and Dr. Dennis Mukwege are a living memory, and they're spoken with a voice of reason, which is why we must all meet our responsibility to combat sexual violence in all its forms.
Okay, so as you can tell, I have prepared this in advance because I knew what was coming. So with conmovedores, poignant. Yes, Kerry uses the word poignant, and that's a very good word. As I say, I like to use harrowing, for example. Harrowing, moving. You can just say moving, poignant. And then what do we say here? Yeah, a living recordatorio vivo, a living reminder. Con voz propria, you could say, with their own voice, but so it's basically a first-hand living reminder de la razón por la cual todos debemos cumplir, of why we all must cumplir con la responsabilidad. It's one of these, it looks simple, but you need to, that's an expression that needs to come off the tongue. There should be no hesitation here. And, there's a number of ways of doing that, comply with our responsibility, meet our responsibility. I think Kerry said that's very good. Fulfill our responsibility, deliver on. That's a nice one as well. So you got a few options there, but you should be able to pull that out of the bag straight away without any hesitation. And so just the final sentence, well, the final couple of sentences, we'll play it through till the end.
For every harrowing tale of a survivor, there are many silent stories from anonymous victims expecting us to put an end to this crime. The time has come to show them that they are not waiting in vain. I thank you.
Okay, so a fairly straightforward conclusion. Just some. Well, not that straightforward actually. You want to get your good adjectives in. You want your adjectives. So relato estremecedor. You want something like, I think I said, or something I've noted down here, heartrending, heartbreaking account, heartrending account. And then also, these crimes. Yeah, ha llegado el momento de demostrarles que esa espera no es inútil. So, as Kerry rightly says, in vain es inútil. The waiting won't be in vain, as opposed to just useless. That just wouldn't come off right. So in vain, to no avail, I guess, is another synonym that you can use there. All right. So that's a handy text. Some very good vocabulary pops up there, on legal vocabulary. Some good adjectives throughout. That's a good text to do. So, as ever, when I finish text, pick up my 3 highlights from what we've done. So, my 3 highlights that I've chosen. So, the first one is going back to the beginning of the text, if you recall, the notion of responsibility to protect, R to P. Make sure you know about that concept. It's something that comes up all the time, especially when talking about issues of peace and security. Very divisive notion. Be aware that, for example, the Russians and Chinese, for example, are going to tend to be very skeptical of that notion. Western nations are going to tend to be more positive, often looking for, to justify any foreign invasions that are carried out, whereas the Russians and the Chinese are going to be much more skeptical, fearing that it's sort of tantamount to interference in internal affairs of states. So that's my first highlight. The second highlight, as it were, would be the package of legal words that you get in one of those paragraphs. Let me just find it here. So all these 3 words: enjuiciamiento, culpables, and denuncia. Try and remember those words. They're very important. Enjuiciamiento, prosecute. Culpables, the perpetrators. Very good word, very useful word. The perpetrators. I mean, I think when you first start doing this thing, your immediate reaction for culpables is to talk about the guilty ones. Doesn't quite sound right though. I mean, to prosecute the guilty ones. No, in English we say the perpetrators, the wrongdoers at a push. And then this idea, denuncia, of a report, denunciar un crimen, to report a crime. Okay, so that's my second highlight, and then my final highlight is what I was just talking about a moment ago. Think about this idea that I'm going to bring it up again in future texts if it comes up, of trying to find a way of turning this construction, this verb, adjective, we think that something is good, we think something is bad, compressing it, distilling it into like 1 or 2 English words. So as I said, if it's something good, if you like the look of something, encourages. If you don't like it, to caution against. And if it's something that's already happened in the past, you welcome it. And if you didn't like what it was, you're opposed to it. Just occurred to me, question the need. Maybe Uruguay questions the need for having these dialogues, if that's what they happen to be referring to. Find an expression that you like. Often it's about finding something that you like. Okay, question that sort of sits comfortably with you. As I say, we're going to be looking up those again. Okay, so that brings us to the end of another episode. I hope it's been useful for you. As I said, in the description box, I'm going to put up the links to the original Uruguayan statement, and you'll find also this written text for you to print down. So record yourself first, or rather, we'll download the original statement, record yourself, and then print off the text, and then follow along with me. Follow along this episode, and I think that's the best way to make progress here. All right, well, with that we've come to the end of our show. So yeah, we're coming to the end of the show now. So as usual, remember to do the usual things. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the video. If you haven't subscribed already, then consider doing so. Press the subscribe button. I'm on about 20 now subscribers. Tell your friends all about it. Let them get some of the benefit from this show as well. And as a special treat, as I say, this whole episode has been about Uruguay, and I'm actually going to dedicate this episode to a friend of mine, Jose from Uruguay, who I used to work with about 17 or 18 years ago. He used to sell advertising space in a magazine together. Lovely fellow, lovely fellow. Always makes me think nice things of Uruguay. And just for him, I've got this little special treat lined up. Remember how I was telling you how the Uruguayans beat Brazil, famous final 1950. If you just look now. So ladies and gentlemen, we're now actually skipping ahead 2 days from when I finished filming the last segment. Now, my original intention had been, in fact, to play a brief 1-minute highlight reel from YouTube of that famous match, Brazil against Uruguay. However, when it actually came to posting the completed video on YouTube, lo and behold, I received a copyright injunction saying I couldn't post it. This was from FIFA, but it had been apparently in breach of copyright, so I'm very disappointed about that. However, if at first you don't succeed, try again, as the old saying goes. And so we actually have, thanks to the wonders of modern technology, we have been able to recreate the unforgettable historic scenes, if not quite the atmosphere, of that historic day in Rio de Janeiro 70 years ago. Feast your eyes on this, ladies and gentlemen. here we are, the Maracana Stadium. The players are out on the pitch. The match is about to start. And here we go. And Brazil have the ball going down the right wing, plays the gentleman in, and Brazil shoot, and it's 1-0 to Brazil in the 50th minute. But here come Uruguay on the counter-attack. Crosses from the right, first time shot, and it's 1-1 to Uruguay. And here come Uruguay again, 10 minutes from the end, plays a 1-2 on the right. He's through on goal, shoots at the near post. It's a goal, it's in. The Brazilian players lying on the floor. And the Uruguayans are celebrating. It's delirium in the Maracana. Uruguay are world champions. Now, at this point, I was thinking about playing We Are the Champions, but for fear of getting hit with another copyright injunction, this time by Queen, you'll just have to do without that. Anyway, I hope that's gone some way to making up for not being able to see the highlights reel live, as it were. So with that, we're now gonna, that was for you, by the way, Jose, hope you enjoyed that. We are now gonna get back into our time machines, go back to 2 days ago, and finish the video. So don't switch off just yet, don't you dare. All right, so that brings us to the end of our episode. As usual, I'm back. With that, I declare episode 5 of the Interpretation Station adjourned. See you next time.
The train is now leaving the interpretation station. We hope you enjoyed your visit. Until next time, folks.